Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Quantitative Reasoning. Today we are moving into Chapter 3, which is all about logic. And we're going to start off in Section 3.1 with statements, negation, and quantified statements. So we've got several objectives in this section, but just to kind of summarize, we're going to learn what a logical statement is, and we're going to learn how to negate a logical statement. We're going to learn how to represent both of those things in symbols. And then we're going to talk about what a quantified statement is and how to negate those. So here we go. So first of all, this is going to be unlike anything you've probably ever studied before in a math class. Most of the time, our math classes tend to focus on problems and numbers. This chapter is more concerned with ideas and how to determine if a statement is true or false. So you might be wondering, what even is the purpose? Well, the rules of logic can help us better evaluate the claims that we see every day all around us in advertising and in politics, in the news. People are always making claims. So if you learn how to think systematically, that's going to make you better at evaluating the claims that you run into in every area of life. And also, understanding logic helps you construct better and more convincing arguments. So let's go ahead and jump right in. In logic, a statement is a sentence that is either true or false, but not both simultaneously. Here are a couple of examples of statements. London is the capital of England. That's either true or false, but not both. That one happens to be true. Here's another statement. William Shakespeare wrote the television series The Big Bang Theory. Now, clearly that statement is false, but it is a logical statement because it is either true or false. It can't be both, and it's not up to anyone's opinion. Now, as long as a sentence is either true or false, even if we don't know which it is, that sentence is considered a statement. Here's an example. The United States has the world's highest divorce rate. I do not happen to know whether that statement is true or false, but it clearly is either true or false, and we don't have to know which one it is to know that this is a statement. Somebody could look it up and determine whether it's true or false, but it's not a matter of opinion. So what are some things that are not statements? Commands, questions, and opinions are not statements because they're not true or false. Here are a few examples. Number 1, think before you speak. Could that be a statement? That is not a statement because it's a command. So it's not either true or false. Number 2, does "it is what it is" annoy you in everyday conversation? So that's also not a statement because it's a question. So it's, again, not either true or false. And number 3, Titanic is the greatest movie of all time. Well, that is at least a sentence, but it's not a statement because greatest implies somebody's opinion. So there's no objective way to measure what the greatest movie is. So this one is up to somebody's opinion and therefore not a statement. So here is example 1. It says determine whether each sentence is a statement, and if it's not a statement, determine why not. Okay, part A. Paris is the capital of France. That is a statement, and it happens to be a true statement. Part B. Should the SAT be abolished? That's not a statement because it's a question. So it can't be true or false. Part C. Go now. Again, not a statement because it's a command. And D. Apple sold 194 million iPhones in 2020. I have no idea if that's true or not, but that sentence is either true or false. It's not both, and it's not a matter of opinion. So that's a statement. Now let's talk about representing statements with symbols. In symbolic logic, we use lowercase letters, such as P, Q, R, and S, to represent statements. Here are a couple of examples. The statement P says London is the capital of England. And the statement Q says William Shakespeare wrote the television series The Big Bang Theory. See, the P and the Q are just labels that we attach to the statements. Now let's talk about negating statements. Negating a statement just means changing it so that if it was true, now it's false, and if it was false, now it's true. So the negation of a true statement is a false statement, and the negation of a false statement is a true statement. So here in example 2, we're going to practice forming the negation of each statement. Now, English is a very flexible language, so a lot of times there's more than one way to form the negation. One common way that we can negate a statement is to add the word not to it, or if it contains the word not, we can take it out. And another way that we can form a negation is just to add the words, "it is not true that," at the beginning. So you have some choices here. You can do whatever sounds the most natural, or whatever helps you understand the situation better. So let's take a look. Part A, the statement we're given says Shakespeare wrote the television series The Big Bang Theory. Okay, so whether that's true or false, it doesn't matter. If we want to negate it so that it says the opposite, all that we have to do is take out the word wrote and put in did not write. So we could say Shakespeare did not write the television series The Big Bang Theory. Another way we could form the negation would be to say it is not true that Shakespeare wrote the television series The Big Bang Theory. Okay, so you see how we have different ways that we can do it and still accomplish the same thing. The goal is to negate the statement, to change it so that if it was true, now it's false. If it was false, now it's true. In part B, the statement is today is not Monday. So it's easy to negate that one. All we have to do is remove the word not and say today is Monday. So I want to make sure you understand that when you have a statement and its negation, one of the statements will be true and the other one will be false. That's the whole point of a negation, is it's the opposite of the original statement. Okay, here's part C. Paris is the capital of Spain. Well, if we want to negate this, all we have to do is insert the word not. Paris is not the capital of Spain. That's probably the easiest way to do that. And then in part D, July is not a month. So this statement contains the word not, and therefore we can form the negation really easily by just taking out the word not. So July is a month. Now, the negation of a statement P is expressed by writing a tilde in front of the P. So we write tilde P, but we read this as not P. Or you could also say it is not true that P. But typically when we see a tilde in front of a letter like that, we just read it as not, whatever the letter is. So in this case, not P. Now that brings up a question. Does not P always have to represent a negative statement? And the answer to that question is no. The tilde does not mean that the statement itself will be negative. It just means that it's the negation of a statement. So for example, we could have a statement P that says elephants do not have wings. And then if we wanted to write the negation of that statement, we would write not P, elephants do have wings. Now it's perfectly correct to have statements labeled like this, but I think you can see that it would get confusing pretty quickly because this statement that's labeled P contains the word not. But the statement not P sounds negative, but it's actually the positive statement. I think it'll be easier for us in the long run if we make a habit out of labeling positive statements with a letter like P or Q or R, so that the negation of that statement, in this case not P, would be the negative statement. So this is okay, it's not wrong, but usually if we are allowed to do the labeling ourselves, we would want to avoid a situation like this just to keep from tripping ourselves up. So here's example 3, and it says, let P, Q, and R represent the following statements. Statement P says, Shakespeare wrote the television series The Big Bang Theory. Statement Q says, today is not Monday. Statement R says, Paris is the capital of Spain. Now what they're asking us to do is express each of the following statements symbolically. So in part A, the statement they gave us says, Shakespeare did not write the television series The Big Bang Theory. Okay, well, that's clearly the negation of statement P. Statement P says he did write it. This statement says he did not write it. And so this statement would be not P. So we will write tilde P. Then in part B, the statement says today is Monday. Now if you look back up here at our original statements, Q said today is not Monday. So it looks like this statement is the negation of statement Q. So we will write not Q. But now I just want to touch on what we talked about in the last slide. See how the statement Q is a negative statement and its negation is a positive statement. It says today is Monday, but we're having to call that not Q. So if we had been allowed to label these statements, I probably would have wanted to call this one not Q because it contains the word not, and then the negation would be Q. But see, we did not get to choose the label here. This was labeled for us as Q, and that means the negation is not Q, even though it's a positive statement. It's the negation of the original statement. And then in part C, the statement says Paris is not the capital of Spain. So statement R said Paris is the capital of Spain. And so this statement is the negation of R, so we will write not R. Now let's look at example 4, and they're asking us to do something just a little bit different here. It says, let P, Q, and R represent the following statements. Statement P says that the United States has the world's highest divorce rate. Statement Q says Chicago O'Hare is the world's busiest airport. And statement R says the temperature outside is freezing. And then in part A, the instructions say express the symbolic statement not P in words. So before they gave us a statement and asked us to label it, here they're giving us the label and asking us to come up with the negated statement. So it says express the symbolic statement not P in words. Okay, if statement P said the United States has the world's highest divorce rate, then not P would be that the United States does not have the world's highest divorce rate. But because it's English, there's going to be more than one way to put it. So another way we could form the negation of statement P is to say it is not true that the United States has the world's highest divorce rate. Either one of those works fine for the negation of P. Then in part B, it says express the symbolic statement not Q in words. Okay, so statement Q was that Chicago O'Hare is the world's busiest airport. So not Q is going to be that Chicago O'Hare is not the world's busiest airport. And we won't write it, but again, you could say it is not true that Chicago O'Hare is the world's busiest airport. Part C says express the symbolic statement not R in words. Okay, so R said the temperature outside is freezing, so not R is going to be the temperature outside is not freezing. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about quantified statements. Quantified statements are statements about a quantity of something. So words that are quantifiers or that tell us we're talking about a quantity are words like all, some, no, or sometimes the word none. Another way of saying some is at least one, and so that can be a quantifier. A statement that uses any of these words is called a quantified statement, and here are a few examples, and we'll look closer at these in just a minute. So, all poets are writers. That's a quantified statement because of the word all. Some people are generous. No common colds are fatal. Some students do not work hard. So all, some, and no always indicate a quantified statement. Now we've talked about how English is a very flexible language and there's always more than one way to say something in words. So what we're going to do here is take each of our general quantified statements and say the same thing in different words. And then we'll look at an example of both ways of saying it and see that they mean the same thing. So let's start with the statement that all A are B. So just in general, whatever A and B represent, if you say that all A are B, that's the same thing as saying there are no A that are not B. An example would be the statement, all poets are writers. Another way of saying the same thing is, there are no poets that are not writers. All poets are writers. There are no poets that are not writers. So you can see how both of these statements mean exactly the same thing. Now take the statement, some A are B. Some A are B. We know that another way to say some is to say at least one. So we could say, there is at least one A that is B. An example of that would be, some people are generous. If some people are generous, then there's at least one person who is generous. Or you could just say at least one person is generous. But these two statements are equivalent. They both mean the same thing. Look at the statement, no A or B. Well, if you're saying no A or B, that's the same thing as saying all A or not B. If no A or B, then all A or not B. So an example would be, no common colds are fatal. Another way to say that is, all common colds are not fatal. See how they mean the same thing. And then finally, some A are not B. Another way to say this is, not all A are B. So if we say some students do not work hard, another way of saying the same idea is to say not all students work hard. So the reason I wanted to go through this table with you is that, sometimes when you're working with logical statements, it might be difficult or confusing to come up with the negation of a statement when it's in one form, but if you think about it in a different form, it's very easy to come up with the negation. So just keep that in mind as we're going through the next few examples. If you don't like the way a statement is made, then you can change it to an equivalent form and maybe that will work better for you. Now let's talk about how to form the negation of a quantified statement. You have to be careful here because this is a place where people make a lot of mistakes. Remember that the negation of a true statement has to be false, and the negation of a false statement has to be true. So you can't have a statement and a negation where both could be false at the same time. That's what you want to avoid. If you're not sure about how to negate a quantified statement, then the best thing to do is try forming it first by saying it is not true that, and then think about how you would really say that in everyday language. So for example, consider the statement P, all writers are poets. So let's draw that in the form of a Venn diagram. If all writers are poets, that means that the set of writers is a subset of the set of poets. So we've got this group of poets here, and inside that we have a group of writers. So all writers are poets. There are no writers who are not poets. There are no writers who are outside of the set of poets. Okay? Now your first thought about how to negate this might be to say that no writers are poets. But let's think about that. If no writers are poets, well then that means that we've got this group of poets here, and no writers are poets means the set of writers is completely outside of the set of poets. See, in this Venn diagram, no writers are poets. All the writers are in a completely separate group. The problem here is that it's possible for both of these statements to be false at the same time. So no writers are poets cannot possibly be the negation for all writers are poets. So let's go at it a different way. Remember I said if you're not sure how to form the negation, start out by just putting the words "it is not true that" in front of your original statement. So the negation of all A or B is it is not true that all A are B. So what that would do to our example is statement P would be all writers are poets, and then not P would be it is not true that all writers are poets. So you see how only one of these statements can be true at a time, but one of them has to be true. So that means that the statement we have here as not P really is the negation for the statement P, all writers are poets. However, this is not the only way to say this in English, so what are some other ways that we can say the same thing? So if we want to restate the statement, it is not true that all writers are poets, another way to say that might be, not all writers are poets. So you wouldn't say no writers are poets. If you wanted to restate this, it's not true that all writers are poets, then you could say not all writers are poets. Or you might say some writers are not poets. So I want to make sure you understand that what makes the statement P and the statement not P, no matter how we word it, what makes those two negations of each other is that only one of them can be true at a time, but one of them has to be true. They can't both be false. So if it's true that all writers are poets, then it's false that not all writers are poets. On the other hand, if it's true that not all writers are poets, then it's false that all writers are poets. Now, you might ask me, what about the possibility that no writers are poets? What if it's true that no writers are poets? Well, if no writers are poets, then not P is still true. See, if no writers are poets, then it's still true that not all writers are poets. So we're covered. One of these statements has to be true, but whichever one's true, that means the other one's false. Now here is kind of a trick that has helped me know how to come up with the best way to say the negation. After you put the words "it is not true that" in front of your original statement, one way to figure out the more natural way to say that in English is to imagine yourself in an argument. Like, imagine if somebody's trying to argue with you about this and they say to you, all writers are poets, and you're going to argue back. So the first thing you might say to them is, it's not true that all writers are poets. Not all writers are poets. You see how it just flows? Like, we are used to arguing that way. So if you let yourself pretend that you're arguing, you'll come up with it every time. It's not true that all writers are poets. Not all writers are poets. Some writers are not poets. Can't you just hear yourself like making that argument? And so if you will start by putting the words "it's not true that" in front of your statement, the rest will just flow naturally as you think about it, as you think about how you would make that argument. Okay, now that we've figured out what not P should be, let's take a look at the Venn diagrams again. So we remember the Venn diagram for statement P, all writers are poets, so I'll copy that here. And then one way to say not P was to say some writers are not poets. And the other way we had to say it was not all writers are poets. But it's probably easier to think about how to draw the Venn diagram if we think some writers are not poets. Okay, so again, we've got this set of poets here represented by this circle. And we want to draw the set of writers so that some writers are not poets, but we need to leave open the possibility that some are, so we can have the sets overlap. So this is the Venn diagram for some writers are not poets. So see, there would be some writers over here that are outside of this set of poets. Now, what if it's true that no writers are poets? Well, if no writers are poets, then this Venn diagram still works, but this intersection area right here would be empty. So like we said before, one of the statements has to be true, and no matter which one is true, the other one is false. Now let's talk about the negation of some A or B. So remember that we said one surefire way to get the negation of a statement is just to put the words "it is not true that" in front of that statement. So the negation of some A or B is "it is not true that some A or B." Now that might not be the most natural way to say it in English, so a way that we could translate this same idea into different words might be to say no A or B. So it is not true that some A or B means the same thing as no A or B. Or another way to say it is all A or not B. So for example, let's think about a statement P that says some puppies are ugly. Well, then not P would be, it's not true that some puppies are ugly. So see how one of these is true and the other one is false. All right, now let's think, how can we restate this not P in different words? If it's not true that some puppies are ugly, that means no puppies are ugly, right? It's not true that some puppies are ugly. No puppies are ugly. Another way to say that would be to say, all puppies are not ugly. It's not true that some puppies are ugly. No puppies are ugly. All puppies are not ugly. All three say the same thing. And no matter how not P is worded, if not P is true, then statement P is false. So let's kind of sum up a little bit and kind of make a table of these different types of quantified statements and their negation. This is just in general, and I do not want you to memorize this, but maybe it'll give you just a place to kind of think and organize your thoughts about how this works. So if we start with the statement all A or B, we know that the basic negation of that is it's not true that all A or B. Now, what's a better way to say that in English? If it's not true that all A or B, then what we're really saying is not all A or B. Or we might say some A or not B. It's not true that all A or B, not all A or B, some A or not B. All say the same thing. Now, on the other hand, if you start with one of these two statements, so if you start with the statement some A or not B, or the statement not all A or B, those are both the same thing. So what would be the negation here? Well, the negation here would be it's not true that some A or not B. And if it's not true that some A or not B, that means that all A or B, which puts us right back here. So see, the negation of all A or B is one of these, and the negation of one of these is all A or B. So these two are like opposites of each other. And then let's take the other set, no A or B. So if no A or B, that's the same thing as saying all A or not B. Remember, like the example with the common colds, no common colds are fatal. All common colds are not fatal. Okay, so the negation of no A or B is going to be it's not true that no A or B. Another way of saying that is some A or B. It's not true that no A or B, some A or B. Okay, so this is the negation of the statement no A or B. On the other hand, if you start with the statement some A or B and you want to negate that, you might start by saying it's not true that some A or B. But an easier way to say that in English, instead of saying it's not true that some A or B, you might say no A or B, or you might say all A or not B. And you can see that both of these negations are what we started with up here. Okay, let's look at example 5 together, and we're going to practice writing the negation of a quantified statement. So that's what the instructions say. Write the negation of each of the following statements. And in part A, the statement is all humans are mortal. So one way to start thinking about the negation of this statement is just to think it's not true that in front of it. So the negation would be it's not true that all humans are mortal. Now a more natural way to say that in English might be to say not all humans are mortal. See, you don't want to say that none are mortal. You don't want to say no humans are mortal. But the negation of all humans are mortal is it's not true that all humans are mortal. Not all humans are mortal. And another way to state that would be some humans are not mortal. Okay, so it's either true that all humans are mortal, or it's true that some humans are not mortal. One or the other. And then part B, some students do not come to class prepared. So the negation would be, it's not true that some students do not come to class prepared. If it's not true that some students do not come to class prepared, what we're saying is all students come to class prepared. Okay, part C. Some psychotherapists are in therapy. So the negation would be, it's not true that some psychotherapists are in therapy. We could say, no psychotherapists are in therapy. If it's not true that some psychotherapists are in therapy, then no psychotherapists are in therapy. And then part D, no well-behaved dogs shred couches. Okay, the negation would be, it's not true that no well-behaved dogs shred couches. Some well-behaved dogs do shred couches. And if you're like me, you would not say that your dog was well-behaved if they've shredded your couch, but see, both of these can't be true at the same time. So either no well-behaved dogs shred couches or some well-behaved dogs do shred couches, one or the other, but not both. All right, here's a real-life situation. The manufacturer of my smartphone told me all known safety issues have been resolved. I later learned that the manufacturer never tells the truth. What can I conclude? So you see, the manufacturer said that all known safety issues have been resolved. If that's not true, then there's at least one safety issue that hasn't been resolved. So you wouldn't just jump to say that none of them have been resolved. If it's not true that all of them have been resolved, then the best we can say is that not all known safety issues have been resolved. Or another way you could say that is, some known safety issues have not been resolved. And then let's take a look at example 7. The Board of Supervisors told us all new tax dollars will be used to improve education. I later learned that the Board of Supervisors never tells the truth. What can I conclude? Okay, if they never tell the truth, then this statement is false. If it's not true that all new tax dollars will be used to improve education, then the negation of that is going to be that not all new tax dollars will be used to improve education. Or you could say some new tax dollars will not be used to improve education. Both of these mean the same thing, and they're both the negation of what the Board of Supervisors said. Example 8. During the Watergate scandal in 1974, President Richard Nixon assured the American people that, in all my years of public service, I have never obstructed justice. Later, events indicated that the president was not telling the truth. What can we conclude? Okay, if it's not true that he had never obstructed justice, then we would have to say that the president had obstructed justice at least once. And finally, example 9. So this one says, our culture celebrates romantic love as the basis for marriage. However, the bar graph below illustrates that in some countries, romantic love plays a less important role in marriage. Use the graph to determine whether each statement is true or false. If the statement is false, write its negation. Okay, so part A, the statement says nearly half of India's college students are willing to marry without romantic love. Okay, look at the graph, and this graph is a bar graph of the percentage of college students willing to marry without romantic love. So when we find India, it looks like 49% of college students surveyed in India were willing to marry without romantic love. And so that's nearly half, so I would say that in part A the statement is true. And then the statement in part B says no college students in the United States are willing to marry without romantic love. So when we go to the chart, it looks like 4% of students in the U.S. are willing to marry without romantic love. So I don't think we can say it's true that no college students in the United States are willing to marry without romantic love, because there are some. So we would have to say that this statement is false. And the negation would be that some college students in the U.S. are willing to marry without romantic love. And then part C, not all college students in Mexico are willing to marry without romantic love. So when we look at the bar for Mexico, it looks like only 10% of college students in Mexico are willing to marry without romantic love. So it's true that not all college students are willing to marry without romantic love. Only 10% are, so we'll say true there. And then part D, all college students in Pakistan are willing to marry without romantic love. Well, when you look at the bar for Pakistan, it looks like only 51% of students in Pakistan are willing to marry without romantic love. So it's not true to say that all of them are. So we'll say that's false. And then the negation would be some college students in Pakistan are not willing to marry without romantic love. All right, you guys, that's it. I think by far the trickiest thing we did was to negate the quantified statements. It just takes a little practice, though, and if you'll think about what you're saying and remember that between a statement and its negation, one of the statements has to be true and the other one has to be false, I think that will help you. Remember, you can always start by forming the negation with "it is not true that," and then put your original statement, so that's also helpful. But if you'll just think through this and spend a little time working on it, it'll come to you. And I'll see you again in the next section. Bye now.